November 24th, 1944, 30,000 feet above Tokyo. Captain Robert Morgan gripped the control yoke of his Boeing B-29 Superfortress as the first formation of American heavy bombers approached the Japanese capital since the Doolittle raid of April 1942. Through the pressurized cockpit windows, he could see Mount Fuji rising majestically in the winter sunlight, its snow-covered peak gleaming against the azure sky. Below, the sprawling metropolis of Tokyo lay vulnerable for the first time in the war. Morgan keyed his intercom. "Bombardier, we're 3 minutes from initial point. Are you ready?" Lieutenant Thomas Ferriby, who would later achieve immortality over Hiroshima, replied calmly, "Ready, skipper. Target acquisition confirmed. This one's for keeps." In the streets below, Japanese civilians pointed skyward at the silver specks glinting in the stratosphere. Air raid sirens wailed, but many people simply stood and stared. These weren't the medium bombers they'd grown accustomed to seeing in newsreels from China. These were something else entirely, something impossible. American heavy bombers couldn't reach Japan. Everyone knew that. The distance was too great, the ocean too vast, the logistics insurmountable. Yet there they were, flying serenely above the effective ceiling of Japanese interceptors, beyond the reach of anti-aircraft fire, untouchable and inexorable as fate itself. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace with 64 confirmed victories, watched from Atsugi Airfield as the formation passed overhead. He had been scrambled with his squadron of Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, but by the time they reached 25,000 feet, their engines gasping in the thin air, the American bombers were already 5,000 feet above them and pulling away. Sakai later wrote in his combat diary, "We climbed with everything our aircraft could give. My Zero was shaking, the engine temperature redlining, the controls mushy in the thin air. I pushed her to 28,000 feet, higher than I'd ever flown. The Americans were still above us, untouched, unreachable. It was like chasing clouds. In that moment, I understood that Japan had lost the war. If America could build bombers that flew where we couldn't reach them, that carried bombs across 3,000 miles of ocean, that operated in comfort while we suffocated in our cockpits, then all our courage and skill meant nothing. We were fighting the future with the past." The B-29 Superfortress represented the most ambitious aircraft development program in history. Its story began not with military vision, but with military panic. In 1939, as Nazi Germany conquered Poland and war spread across Europe, the United States Army Air Corps faced a terrifying reality. If Britain fell, America would have no forward bases from which to strike Germany. If Japan continued its expansion across the Pacific, American possessions would be isolated and indefensible. What the Air Corps needed was a bomber that could strike targets 2,500 miles away, deliver a meaningful bomb load, defend itself against interceptors, and return home. Such an aircraft didn't exist. The physics seemed impossible, the technology unavailable, the costs unimaginable. On January 29, 1940, the Army Air Corps issued Specification R-40B, requesting proposals for a hemisphere defense weapon capable of carrying 1 ton of bombs for 5,333 miles. Boeing's proposal, designated Model 345, was the most radical and ambitious. It promised performance that seemed like science fiction, a cruise speed of 350 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, a range of 5,333 miles, a bomb load of 16,000 pounds, and a defensive armament of 12.50 caliber machine guns in remote-controlled turrets. The pressurized cabin would allow the crew to operate in shirt sleeves at altitudes where enemy fighters couldn't breathe. The estimated cost was staggering, $3 billion for initial production, more than the entire federal budget of 1940. Boeing's chief engineer, Edward Curtis Wells, understood that they were proposing not an evolution of existing bombers, but a complete revolution in aviation technology. The B-29 would incorporate more technological innovations than any aircraft ever built. Pressurized crew compartments never used in a production bomber. Remote-controlled gun turrets, a system still experimental. An analog computer fire control system more complex than anything outside of naval warships, and the right R3350 duplex Cyclone engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,200 horsepower that existed only on paper and had never run successfully. The engine became the program's first crisis. Wright Aeronautical's R3350 proved to be a nightmare of overheating, oil consumption, and catastrophic failures. The cylinders ran so hot that engine fires were common. Test runs rarely exceeded 30 minutes before something exploded, melted, or seized. By 1942, the engine had killed more test pilots than enemy action. Boeing test pilot Edmund T. Allen, one of aviation's most respected figures, called the R3350 a 2,200 horsepower time bomb. On February 18, 1943, Allen's prediction proved prophetic. Flying the second B-29 prototype from Boeing Field in Seattle, an engine fire spread to the wing structure. Allen attempted an emergency landing but crashed in a meatpacking plant, killing himself and his entire crew, along with 19 workers on the ground. The program nearly died that day. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, faced a decision that would determine the war's outcome: cancel the B-29 program and accept that Japan's home islands would remain invulnerable for years, or push forward with an aircraft that was killing its own crews, consuming resources desperately needed elsewhere, and might never achieve its promised performance. Arnold made the most audacious decision of his career. He ordered the B-29 into full production before a single test aircraft had flown successfully, before the engines were reliable, before the systems were proven, before anyone knew if the damn thing would even work. This decision, called concurrent development, violated every principle of aircraft design. Boeing would be manufacturing production aircraft while still designing and testing prototypes. Changes discovered during testing would have to be retrofitted to planes already built. The financial risk was enormous, the technical challenges unprecedented, but Arnold calculated that even with massive delays and cost overruns, the B-29 would still reach combat faster than any conventional development program. He was gambling America's industrial capacity on an aircraft that existed mostly in blueprints and hope. The gamble worked barely. By March 1944, the first B-29s were arriving in India, assigned to the XX Bomber Command under Brigadier General Kenneth Wolfe. The plan was to base the Superfortresses in India, stage through forward fields in China, and strike Japanese targets in Manchuria and the home islands. It was a logistical nightmare. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb, every spare part had to be flown over the Himalayas from India to China in the B-29s themselves. It took 7 missions over the hump to accumulate enough supplies for one combat mission. The first combat mission launched on June 5, 1944, targeting railway yards in Bangkok, Thailand. 98 B-29s took off, 14 aborted with mechanical failures, 5 crashed, 18 failed to reach the target due to engine problems. Of the 61 aircraft that attacked, 42 missed the target entirely. It was a disaster. General Wolfe was relieved of command. His replacement, Major General Curtis LeMay, arrived with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. LeMay took one look at the B-29 operations and understood that the aircraft was being used incorrectly. The crews were flying too high, sacrificing accuracy for safety. The bomb loads were too light. The maintenance was inadequate. Most critically, the crews didn't trust their aircraft. LeMay's solution was characteristically brutal. He ordered maximum weight combat loads, forcing crews to take off with fuel tanks filled to capacity and bomb bays packed to structural limits. He mandated formation bombing from lower altitudes, 25,000 feet instead of 30,000, accepting increased risk for improved accuracy. He established draconian maintenance standards. Within 2 months, the abort rate dropped from 15% to 3%. The accuracy improved dramatically, and the crews, seeing their aircraft perform reliably, began to trust the B-29. The true demonstration of the Superfortress's capabilities came on November 24, 1944, when 111 B-29s of the 21st Bomber Command, now operating from newly captured bases in the Mariana Islands, launched the first strategic bombing raid on Tokyo. This mission, flying from Saipan 1,500 miles across open ocean, represented everything the B-29 had been designed to accomplish. The Japanese, who had grown complacent in their island fortress, faced a stark new reality. Distance, which had protected them for centuries, no longer mattered. The B-29 that attacked Tokyo that November morning was a technological marvel. The fuselage stretched 99 feet, with a wingspan of 141 feet. Empty, it weighed 74,500 pounds. Loaded for a maximum range mission, it could weigh up to 140,000 pounds. 4 Wright R3350 engines produced 8,800 horsepower total, but the revolutionary features were inside. The crew compartments, both forward and aft, were pressurized to maintain 8,000-foot atmospheric conditions even at 30,000 feet operational altitude. Crews could remove oxygen masks, work in relative comfort, and maintain combat effectiveness for missions lasting 16 hours or more. Japanese interceptor pilots, struggling in unpressurized cockpits at 25,000 feet, watched American bomber crews through windows, seeing them moving about in shirt sleeves, and understood the profound technological gap they faced. The defensive armament was equally revolutionary. 4 General Electric remote-controlled turrets, 2 above and 2 below the fuselage, each mounting 2.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, provided interlocking fields of fire. A 5th turret in the tail mounted 2 additional 50 caliber guns and a 20mm cannon. The central fire control system, an analog computer more sophisticated than anything else flying, automatically calculated range, deflection, temperature, altitude, and airspeed. Gunners sat at stations with computing gun sights, able to control multiple turrets simultaneously. A single gunner could bring the firepower of 4 or 6 guns to bear on a single target. The defensive battery could deliver 6,000 rounds per minute of combined fire, creating a lethal sphere around the aircraft. Captain Yasuhiko Kuroe, commanding the 244th Sentai, equipped with Nakajima Ki 44 interceptors, led the first Japanese attempt to intercept B-29s at altitude. His after-action report revealed the impossibility of the task. "We reached 9,000 meters," he wrote, "equivalent to 29,500 feet. My aircraft was shaking violently, the controls nearly unresponsive. I could see the American bombers above us, flying in perfect formation, apparently untroubled by the altitude. When we attempted to close for attack, they increased speed and pulled away effortlessly. When we did manage to attack from below, their defensive fire was devastating. Lieutenant Nakamura's fighter simply disintegrated. The Americans' guns appeared to fire continuously, not in bursts like our weapons. We lost 4 fighters and damaged 3 others. Not one bomber fell. I do not believe these aircraft can be stopped by conventional fighter attack. The Japanese tried everything to counter the B-29 threat. They developed the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, a fighter capable of reaching 32,000 feet. It was too late and produced in too few numbers. They experimented with air-to-air phosphorus bombs dropped from above. The bombs rarely hit. They developed ramming tactics, training pilots to deliberately collide with B-29s. Some pilots did ram bombers, achieving spectacular martyrdom. The B-29s usually made it home anyway, their robust structure absorbing damage that would have destroyed any other aircraft. Nothing worked. The mathematics were inexorable. A B-29 flying at 30,000 feet and 350 miles per hour was untouchable by Japanese fighters designed to operate at 20,000 feet and 320 miles per hour maximum. By March 1945, LeMay faced a strategic dilemma. High-altitude precision bombing wasn't destroying Japanese industrial capacity fast enough. The combination of persistent cloud cover, jet stream winds at 30,000 feet that exceeded 200 miles per hour, and the dispersed nature of Japanese industry meant bombing accuracy was poor. The alternative was terrifying in its implications: low-altitude incendiary attacks on Japanese cities. The plan required stripping the B-29s of most defensive armament to increase bomb load, flying at night to avoid fighters, and attacking from 5,000 to 8,000 feet, where accuracy was assured and bomb loads could be maximized. It meant deliberately targeting civilian areas, transforming strategic bombing into strategic annihilation. The first test of this new approach came on the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945. The target was Tokyo. The bomb load was incendiary clusters, M69 devices designed to start fires rather than destroy structures. 334 B-29s took off from bases across the Marianas. They carried 1,665 tons of incendiaries. The weather was perfect, cold, dry, with winds gusting to 25 miles per hour. Conditions ideal for firestorms. The lead aircraft arrived over Tokyo at 00:15 hours on March 10th. Pathfinder crews marked the target area with napalm bombs. Following bombers dropped their M69 clusters from 5,000 feet, low enough that crews could see individual buildings and streets. The incendiaries fell in precise patterns, each cluster breaking apart at 2,000 feet and scattering 47 individual bombs across a 100-foot radius. Each M69 contained jellied gasoline that ignited on impact and burned at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 30 minutes, fires were merging into a conflagration that created its own weather. The firestorm that engulfed Tokyo that night killed approximately 100,000 people, more than either atomic bomb would kill 4 months later. The fires generated winds exceeding 50 miles per hour. The temperature at ground level exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass. People caught in the open were cremated where they stood. The Sumida River became a death trap as thousands drowned trying to escape the flames. The B-29 crews, flying through smoke that rose to 15,000 feet, encountered turbulence so severe that aircraft were thrown thousands of feet vertically. The smell of burning flesh permeated the pressurized cabins. Captain Robert Raymer wrote in his mission report, "The thermals from the fires were so strong they lifted the aircraft 600 feet in seconds. We could feel the heat through the fuselage. Below us, the city was gone, not burning, gone, replaced by a sea of flame 15 miles across." The Tokyo firebombing demonstrated that the B-29, designed as a precision strategic bomber, had been transformed into a weapon of mass destruction. Over the next 5 months, B-29s systematically destroyed 67 Japanese cities. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, all burned. The incendiary campaign killed over 300,000 civilians and left 8 million homeless. Japanese industry, already starved for resources by submarine blockade, collapsed under the assault. Yet Japan refused to surrender. The military leadership, committed to a final battle on the home islands, believed that American resolve would break before Japanese spirit did. They were wrong, but their intransigence forced a decision that would change human history. In December 1944, even as LeMay's B-29s were beginning their conventional campaign, another group of superfortresses was being modified for a special mission. The 509th Composite Group, commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets, was training for a task so secret that most crew members didn't know what they were preparing for. They practiced flying individual aircraft at high altitude, dropping single large practice bombs, then executing a violent 155-degree diving turn to escape the blast radius. The bombs they would carry had cost $2 billion to develop and represented the culmination of physics research dating back to the 1930s. Fat Man and Little Boy, the atomic bombs, weighed 10,000 and 9,700 pounds respectively. They carried an explosive yield equivalent to 21,000 tons of TNT. No aircraft in American inventory except the B-29 could carry them. On August 6, 1945, at 2:45 a.m., a single B-29 named Enola Gay took off from Northfield, Tinian. Colonel Tibbets pushed the throttles forward, and the overloaded bomber accelerated down the 8,500-foot runway, lifting off and clearing the perimeter fence by less than 10 feet. The flight to Hiroshima took 6 hours. Over Iwo Jima, Navy Captain William Parsons armed Little Boy by inserting the final uranium components. At 0809 hours, Bombardier Major Thomas Ferriby identified Hiroshima through his Norden bomb sight. The city, untouched by previous raids, spread below them in the morning sunlight. Tibbets flew straight and level at 31,060 feet. At 0815 hours and 17 seconds, Little Boy dropped from the bomb bay. Tibbets immediately executed the escape maneuver, a violent diving turn that would put 8.5 miles between the aircraft and detonation point in 43 seconds. At 0816 hours, Little Boy detonated 1,900 feet above Hiroshima with a yield of 15 kilotons. The flash was visible 250 miles away. The temperature at ground zero reached 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The shock wave destroyed everything within a half-mile radius. The mushroom cloud rose to 60,000 feet. Tail gunner Sergeant George Caron transmitted the first description: a column of smoke rising fast. It's like a mushroom. The city is completely obscured by smoke and flames. My God. 70,000 people died instantly. Another 70,000 would die from radiation exposure over the following months. 3 days later, on August 9th, another B-29 named Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, carried Fat Man to Kokura. Cloud cover obscured the primary target. Sweeney diverted to Nagasaki. At 11:01 hours, Fat Man detonated 1,650 feet above the Urakami Valley with a 21 kiloton yield, killing 40,000 people instantly. 6 days later, on August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender. The stated reason was explicit. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is indeed incalculable. The B-29's combat record defied comprehension. Between June 1944 and August 1945, B-29s flew 34,790 combat sorties. They dropped 171,060 tons of bombs. They destroyed 600 square miles of urban area across 67 cities. They sank or damaged 1,200 ships. The loss rate, 1.4% per mission, was the lowest of any American bomber in World War II. But statistics alone cannot capture what the B-29 represented. It was the first strategic weapon that made geography irrelevant. The first bomber that could strike any target on Earth given sufficient forward basing. The first aircraft whose crews operated in comfort while waging total war. The first weapons platform capable of carrying the atomic bomb. And the first manifestation of American industrial capacity translating directly into strategic dominance. In September 1945, as occupation forces landed in Japan, intelligence teams interviewed surviving Japanese fighter pilots and found men traumatized by their helplessness. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai told interrogators, "The B-29 destroyed our will to fight more effectively than any weapon could. We saw them flying in perfect formation, untouched by our fighters, immune to our anti-aircraft fire, destroying our cities at will. We were brave, we were skilled, we were irrelevant." They redefined warfare by making courage and skill subordinate to technology and production. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force, a restored B-29 named Boxcar sits in the World War II gallery. Visitors walk beneath its massive wings and peer into the bomb bay where Fat Man once hung. The placard notes that this specific aircraft killed 40,000 people in seconds and contributed to ending a war that had killed 70 million. The B-29 Superfortress entered combat as an unproven experiment, an aircraft so advanced it was manufactured before it could fly successfully. It ended the war as the most effective strategic bomber ever built, a weapon that made distance meaningless. Japanese officials who had mocked American industrial capacity in 1941 surrendered in 1945 aboard the USS Missouri, while overhead flights of B-29s flew in formation as a reminder of what American industry had accomplished. The machine that ended distance also ended the illusion that any nation could stand against American industrial might. When the last B-29 landed after the final combat mission on August 14, 1945, it marked not just the end of World War II, but the beginning of an era where strategic air power backed by nuclear weapons would determine the fate of nations. The thunder had spoken, and the lesson was absolute. In modern warfare, industrial logic defeats martial spirit. Technology trumps courage, and production capacity matters more than bravery. The B-29 Superfortress proved these truths with fire, and the world has never forgotten.